sometimes it can feel really hopeless seeing 2 years of just nonstop genocide with basically no end in sight. But there are so many parallels to, as you said, the fall of apartheid, and as you said, college campuses were an absolutely massive part of that, including here at UC Berkeley.
What's next for a neighborhood under siege? We'll have to wait and see. Reporting live, Sadie Sinclair, Channel 7 News.
Peyrin just ended his 38-day hunger strike in solidarity with Gaza, where he was eating 250 calories a day, which is about what many people in Gaza have had access to during the starvation campaign forced on them by Israel and the US. Some of the tactics of that campaign include Israelis destroying food aid, killing aid workers, murdering people who are just lining up to get the limited aid supplies that there actually is. They've even hired influencers from the US to make TikToks showing themselves standing next to pallets of aid that will never make it to people in Gaza. Effectively, they're movie props. Peyrin's hunger strike is happening as flotilla boats have just been intercepted by Israel's Navy. Some of those people are still being held captive, and Peyrin's hunger strike has been effective as a tactic of keeping people in the bay, keeping their energies focused on Gaza through a social media campaign. He's had people join him on one-day solidarity strikes, and everyone in his classes has had to be witness to how starvation changes the body's composition. And as a bonus, during his strike, he found out days before we spoke that Berkeley was one of the colleges to deliver his and over 100 other names to the Trump administration as part of Israel's taking a knife to anti-Semitism claims by falsely conflating anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. One being the hatred of Jews, the other one, which I myself am guilty of, hatred of people who think they're superior to everyone else because they were just born that way. Part of Peyrin's campaign is collecting contributions for people who are starving in Gaza, and you'll find some of those links in the show notes. And quickly, thank you to Janita for subscribing at patreon.com/sadfrancisco. I would probably be doing this podcast with or without the kindness of people such as Janita, but not as often, and it would probably sound a lot shittier. The videos on TikTok and Reels would be fewer because TikTok doesn't really pay as well as a lot of people think. For example, I made about $30 last month from TikTok views. How are you feeling, first off?
Things are just really exhausting this far in. Like, I think I've said this before on some of the videos that we record. But yeah, even just daily tasks like getting up, using the bathroom, opening the door are pretty exhausting. Let alone things like recording a video or like teaching a class. Usually your body's sore after doing all of that. That being said, though, it just really goes to show how catastrophic the situation is in Palestine right now, because for all that I'm going through, like, I can go home and like sleep in a bed. Like, I don't have to worry about a bomb dropping on my head at any moment. I don't have to watch my children or my family or my loved ones starve in front of me and try to think about like who gets that day's share of the food and things like that. I don't have to worry about insufficient medical access because all the hospitals around me have been bombed. I don't have to worry about being displaced and uprooted at any minute and just being told you have to grab whatever you can and just like leave, not knowing if you'll ever come back and not knowing where you're going. So yeah, I would say this has just been a very sobering experience to realize that this is just one of so many ways that Palestinians in Gaza are facing death and destruction and genocide being imposed on them by Israel.
I mean, like you said, like all of the other health things that we're going through all the time, from, COVID to getting a cold or spraining an ankle, like just how many more times that makes it harder for people to deal with. And that's what, I mean, it sounds like, like a large percentage of people in Gaza are dealing with.
Right, and there's so many preventable deaths in Gaza too. This is something you hear a lot when you listen to like doctors who've been there and volunteered there, or doctors who are still currently working there. Is like, sorry if I was interrupting, but like they'll say that someone comes in with something that's totally treatable in like any functioning hospital, but because the health system is so catastrophic that people are like lying on the floor because there's no beds, or they're like not even in the hospital, they're just outside the hospital because there's no space inside. And these people like are now facing death sentences because they have this fully treatable disease or like a fully treatable injury, but because their bodies are starving, they don't have the ability to heal, or they just don't have the ability to get the care that they need. So it's this whole like wholesale destruction of basically every facet of life, and that's why I think it's just so plainly obvious that we're watching a genocide unfold in front of us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also like seeing the images of like the food being destroyed, being gaslit by Israel, Netanyahu bringing over these influencers from the US to try to assure people in the US where, without the US, Israel would be shit out of luck. Like there's not any, that's just the fact of the matter. So they have been hiring people to go over there and get paid a lot of money to make propaganda for them to make it seem that the starvation actually is not happening. On top of that, I mean, we could talk about this a little bit later, but like when people do try to go access the aid, people are getting shot at, killed, injured. So yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine it. Were there particular moments that politicized you around this genocide?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me specifically, I would say I started to have a little bit of awareness of it in like 2018, 2019. This is when I was still an undergrad here at Berkeley. And now I'm a full-time lecturer, but at the time I was an undergrad. Um, and I think just, in the news, you would like occasionally see articles about like, and this is 2018, 2019. So that's when like the Gaza Great March of Return was happening. And for those who don't know, this is a protest where people in Gaza were peacefully marching and very explicitly saying that these are peaceful protests. And they would march to the wall of the concentration camp that is Gaza to protest the fact that they're being blockaded and aid or just basic necessities are not being let in. And this is in 2018. And so what do the Israelis do in response? They have a shooting competition, which is all well documented. There are people on record admitting to this, where they try and blow off as many kneecaps of Palestinians as they can to cripple them forever and intentionally not kill them, but leave them disabled as like a warning to say you can't even peacefully protest, because if you do, we're going to leave you paralyzed for your whole life.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of headline that like would come out of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And at the time, it was kind of peripheral for me, so I would just see it and be like, like that's messed up that Israel would be like shooting off kneecaps. But I guess to me at the time, it was still seen as kind of like this far away foreign conflict that wasn't really part of my life at all. And I think this is definitely a big point of propaganda that has gotten used on Americans, is that like Israel Palestine is this super complicated thing, and it's got thousands of years of history and all this religious stuff that you don't want to touch because you're going to be labeled anti-Semitic. So just like don't think about it and just pretend this is really far away thing, like it's the Congo or it's like Myanmar or something like that. I'm not saying that those aren't also important issues, but that's the way that it was kind of framed to me. I think growing up is that it's just this very far away thing. It's like it's a country that you don't even have to think about. It's just like they're always fighting, so just let them fight it out. But I mean, even like just reading kind of peripheral headlines, like when you're scrolling, Twitter or something, you'd see these headlines just be like, really, like that's what they're doing now. Like they're shooting kneecaps and like they're assassinating journalists. And then I think the moment where the scales really fell off my eyes was the 2021 bombing campaign, which only lasted like a week or two, and was basically a microcosm of all the things we're seeing now. So, like during that bombing campaign in 2021, it's kind of the same things as we see now. They were bombing civilians. They very famously bombed a press building. They killed like hundreds of Palestinian civilians through a sustained bombing campaign. And just like with the start of this genocide, when it happened, sorry to go so long, Democrats and Republicans alike just immediately lined up behind the condemn Hamas talking point and the stand with Israel talking point. Like basically every Democrat, every Republican, including President Biden at the time, everyone just lined up across the same talking point. And when I saw all of that unfold, I guess the scales just kind of fell off my eyes, and everyone who's always said, "Oh, it's really complicated and you can't deal with it." It's like it's not complicated, you know. Like bombing a press building is wrong, and like uh, killing civilians by dropping bombs on them when there's nowhere for them to run, like it's just not acceptable. And like everybody in the U.S., all the politicians at least, were just like breathlessly repeating, "Oh, but Hamas, Hamas, Hamas." So yeah, I think that was the first moment where it like really became clear to me that this just wasn't a complicated issue, and also that it was an issue that we as Americans are deeply involved in because our government is the one that's like nonstop supporting Israel and its war crimes. And again, what happened in 2021 was just like 1% of what we're seeing now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So at what point did you decide like I want to actually go on a hunger strike to bring more attention to and like keep Gaza in the minds of more people?
Yeah,
Maybe.
right. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different tactics that have like that we thought about when we were kind of planning about what to do. And the reason why we settled on a hunger strike for this particular action is that there has been this dehumanization of Palestinians, especially in the Western media, where they're not even seen as like people anymore. Like when Palestinians die, it's just a number in the headlines. 85 Palestinians dead, 105 Palestinians dead. And these headlines come out day after day. And when you read them, it barely reads like these are people. Like this was probably someone's like, you know, mother or father or loved one who's just gotten bombed and burned alive in a tent. And there are these stories of people who go out and they're going to go buy bread for their family or something or try and buy any sort of food. I think they get bombed and then they never come back. And then when they come back, it's like in a body bag or it's the shredded remains of them. And then the mother or the children are like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You went out to get bread. We wish we hadn't like, sent you out because now you've been killed." It's like this is sick, and all the while Western media just is pretending like, oh, it's the Hamas-run health ministry, so like these numbers aren't even trustworthy.
Yeah.
And not to mention the dehumanization that's been coming from Israeli government officials. Like very famously, they've called Palestinians like human animals. They've called them rodents. They've called them like subhuman. They said there's no innocence in Gaza, is a thing that they like to repeat a lot. And so all of this dehumanization, I think, made it important, especially when the starvation started to set in at a like very alarming degree earlier this year. Not that it wasn't going on before now, but especially in July of 2025. And since then, to show people that, like, no, this isn't just something that's going on over there that you don't have to worry about. The starvation is very real. It's very human, and it's something that you need to be thinking about because of the complicity that we have in it. And so I think an action like this, what it forces people to reckon with is to see it happen in front of them. So when you're teaching a class or you're like interacting with students, they have to look at you in the face and be like, this person in front of me is someone who's also starving. So that was the idea, I think, behind the hunger strike. It was to really show people that this is something that is urgent and is very human and something that hopefully we could bring here to Berkeley to show them.
Yeah. Another, related to this, I think maybe it's today that we're recording this, that the flotillas are maybe going to meet with some of the Israeli naval ships. We'll see what happens with that. The response from the UC I know around the genocide has been one of silence. It's been one of, in a lot of cases, aggression. Um,
Right.
what has the response from the UC been in this case with the hunger strike?
Right. So, almost by coincidence, like I'd say maybe 12, 13 days into the hunger strike, I get this mysterious letter from the UC that says, "Hey, your name's been submitted to the Federal Department of Education as part of an
Right.
ongoing anti-Semitism investigation." I'm like, great. So instead of listening to our demands or sitting down and talking and being like, "Hey, one of your employees is starving in front of you. Do you want to talk about it?" It seems like their response was to take my name and ship it off to the Trump administration and
Right.
let them do whatever they want with it. So that's the kind of response that I got from the UC. More generally, because I think you brought up a very good point, the UC system as a whole, first of all, they're totally complicit in this genocide because of their investments and their refusal to even think about divesting from Israel and Israeli war crimes. But in addition, we've seen how they try to crack down on pro-Palestinian speech. And what I've been telling people is that despite UC Berkeley in particular always praising its free speech and its commitment to academic freedom, when it comes to the issue of Palestine and repressing pro-Palestinian speech, they're basically on the same side as Trump. There's really no difference between them.
Yeah.
And I think we see that in the way that they decided to crack down on me being outspoken at all about this issue by saying, okay, you've now been reported to the Trump administration, and we won't tell you why, we won't tell you how to defend yourself, just like, we've sent your name off and we're just letting you know that we did that.
Yeah,
So
that totally. I mean, it makes it feel like even more like gaslighting is coming from Trump, from the right wing, even liberals who, maintain that colleges in the US are this like super liberal, like super progressive space. And it's just not true. It's hasn't been true as long as I've been alive. Uh, the the students though, like I know that in some cases people have been joining you on the strike at certain points. In general, what have you felt from students? What have you heard from students about the hunger strike?
yeah, I've heard a lot of support from students, and one thing I want to acknowledge is that hunger strikes aren't one-person actions. There's a really big team behind this that's making it happen. So we have people from the Youth Democratic Socialists of America. There's an called Students Organizing for Liberation. There's Students for Justice in Palestine, faculty and staff for justice in Palestine, probably a bunch I'm forgetting. And all of these just have various members like kind of pitching in and making sure that this is actually an effort that helps to start conversations and you know spreads the word about Palestine and what's going on there. So there's been lots of support, and I have to acknowledge that this kind of action would not have the same impact unless we had that kind of critical mass of organizing. But more generally, I think a lot of students see this and they have the same reaction that I think any person of conscience does, which is like when you open your phone and you scroll for the 700th day in a row and you see, I mean, not to be overly graphic, but like today I saw a video, like an actual video of a nurse working at a hospital who was shot by an Israeli quadcopter drone. And it's like, how do you go on with your day after seeing something like that?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of students feel the same way.
Yeah.
And one of the goals of this action that I think we've really seen is that it's forcing people to have the conversation because, as mentioned earlier, and as you mentioned earlier, one of the things that Israel is trying to do is they're trying to wage this information war. They're pumping tons of disinformation or just outright lies into the U.S. media. To your point earlier about how they try to deny starvation, there was just recently breaking news that Israel and Google signed a $45 million contract so that Israel could show advertisements that just falsely claim that there's no starvation. And apparently, Google is totally fine taking that blood money and running those ads that are just blatantly false, as verified by every governmental or non-governmental organization out there. And so I think I've kind of forgot my train of thought, which happens more nowadays.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, like students have generally been really supportive because I think everyone sees this and knows that this is not something they want to fund or have their tuition go toward or just generally be complicit in. And it's starting a lot of conversations, which I think is really important because the way that you break through this Israeli propaganda and information war is, especially here in the US, is to have these conversations and say, like, for example, you might imagine, I don't know, maybe some student is like out with their friends or whatever, and they're talking about their classes, and they're like, hey, like one of my classes kind of sucks now because my instructor is on hunger strike. I feel like I'm not learning anything. Well, why is that? Why is he on hunger strike? Well, it's because of this. And so it gives people, I think, a way to talk about this issue because it's closer to them. And I think that's really important, again, because of all the different ways that they've been trying to repress any sort of conversation on Palestine.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great tactic that I think just to keep, again, eyes on Gaza, on the genocide that we saw some people partake in back during like South African apartheid, similar situation where you had a lot of US companies and institutions that were invested in South African, the economy over there and making a lot of money off of apartheid South Africa. So yeah, I mean, this isn't the first case where this tactic's been used. Have you felt like the censorship that has gone on around the genocide and like specifically on campus? Have you spoken to people who have expressed that they felt afraid to speak out on, in the same manner that you have?
Yeah, right. Those are all great questions. I mean, to your point about apartheid, also, I think sometimes it can feel really hopeless seeing 2 years of just nonstop genocide with basically no end in sight. But there are so many parallels to, as you said, the fall of apartheid, and as you said, college campuses were an absolutely massive part of that, including here at UC Berkeley, where divestment from South African or to South Africa and apartheid South Africa in general clearly materially played a role in the fall of apartheid. And so that's definitely one of those things that I think keeps me and other folks grounded, is that there is absolutely precedent to divestment and continued activism on college campuses working. To your question earlier about silencing people, yeah, I mean, we totally see it in the fact that they very publicly sent 160 names, including mine, to the Trump administration. And we know what the subtext is there. We know that the Trump administration has been totally open to doing things like abducting Mahmoud Khalil and shoving him in an ICE detention center for like 103 days, or Ramezia Ozturk, a tough student whose only so-called crime was writing an op-ed about Palestine, and suddenly the ICE agents would just come and like abduct this person off the street. And so when UC Berkeley decides to send names to the Trump administration, I think they know, they can see that these are the kinds of headlines that are associated with this administration. And yet they had no problem just laying down and sending these names over. So there absolutely is repression. But on the other side of this coin, I think, is proof that we have a winning message here, and that people of conscience and so many students and staff agree that we don't want our taxpayer dollars, our tuition, our labor, our technology to go toward a genocide. And I think that what we're seeing is that the Trump administration and the UC, they don't have any actual counter argument to this stuff about why they're not divesting or why they're complicit in a genocide. All that they can do is try and shut us up by scaring us, and that shows that we are on the right side of history here, and that we have to continue pushing, because the more of us speak out, the harder it is to come after any one of us. So there is censorship, but I think the censorship shows that we are winning this information war, and we'll continue to do so.
Yeah, I mean, the return on investment for the work that a ton of unpaid activists are doing versus, like you said, Israel's all of a sudden paying Google $45 million to spread their messaging against the work of, people that are just putting their bodies on the line for and speaking out because it's the right thing to do. Specifically with so you are a lecturer in the computer science department at Berkeley.
Right.
I imagine that you are aware that like computer science doesn't have the reputation of being like the department that activism springs from on a regular basis. Any ideas why? And wondering if you think that might be changing.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I think you're totally right about it. And there's no shame in talking about it. The computer science departments in general, and maybe just engineering more broadly, and especially here at Berkeley, just has no appetite for activism whatsoever. I remember as an undergrad, I would try to go to union meetings because I was a TA at the time, and I was like trying to be part of the TA union. And I would show up, and I would just look to my left and right, and I wouldn't recognize a single person because no one from my department would ever bother showing up to union meetings, let alone any sort of organizing or even like going on strike or something like that. If I had to guess why, I'm not like a scholar in this area or anything, but if I had to guess why, I think there's a very common perception that computer science is just this objective thing where like there's a right answer and it's like it's all numbers. So you don't have to think critically about society, or you don't have to think about reading a book. You can just write the code, and if it does the right thing, then you're all good. And I think there's this very pervasive sense among people in computer science that what they're doing is just objectively good. All we have to do is just keep writing code, and it's always going to be good, and everyone's going to be happy, and I don't have to think critically about anything. And if I do think critically, it's always going to be in this very constrained way where we think about like something. We'll bring in some like case study if we have to talk about ethics. Like, always think about copyright law, and it's just intentionally something that's very milquetoast and very boring and very like textbook case study instead of something important like, hey, there's like a high-tech genocide happening right now. Should we talk about that instead of like copyright law? Not that copyright law isn't important, but it's the kind of thing that I think they bring in to muzzle actual discussion about ethics in computer science. So if I had to like take a shot in the dark as to why, I think that's probably a big reason. As to whether it's changing, I would say it absolutely is changing. So one of the first things that really opened my eyes, it was after I graduated, so I was no longer part of the TA union. I switched to being part of the lecturers union, but the TA union at large on like all the UC campuses went on a strike in 2022. This is UAW, and to my surprise, the CS department actually managed to mobilize a huge amount of CS and electrical engineering TAs to also join walkouts. And I think people started to become more aware that like, hey, my labor is actually something that I can negotiate on. Like I can actually negotiate for rights so that I'm not all overworked or so that our department isn't so underfunded. And I think people started to become more aware of how labor organizing worked and the fact that it could win things. And that I think was a very big inspiration to convince me that organizing in my workplace was actually something that could happen. I don't know if there's like a big moral to the story, but just the fact that things are, I think, changing. I don't know why they're necessarily changing, but I think every small action helps. Like having conversations helps, and also just more broadly, going back to the topic of Israel Palestine, like I think people are starting to realize that this is a high-tech genocide, and there are these organizations like No Tech for Apartheid and No Azure for Apartheid that are scoring huge wins when it comes to exposing these tech companies like Google and Amazon and Microsoft for having billion-dollar contracts with the Israeli military for mass surveillance, for AI training, and for all these things that are directly contributing to genocide. I think it was just the other day, like today or yesterday, where finally, after all this pressure from Microsoft activists, Microsoft actually pulled out of one of their collaborations with the Israeli military. Now, of course, they still have tons of other collaborations, so they're still totally complicit. But the fact that they even had to cave and pull out of one of those contracts is just a massive win that I think, as someone who works in computer science department, I would have never imagined seeing Microsoft of all people have to confessed that they were complicit in Israeli war crimes. So yeah, I think there is a really big sea change, and I think that it just means we have to continue pushing.
Yeah, I went to a protest outside of Google. Google was having some kind of conference here, kind of closer to October 7th. And it was the first time that I really remember people in the tech industry, where obviously a lot of people from computer science are going to end up. It was the first, like, you know, lefty progressive protest that was all or generally like organized by people within the tech industry. That was the first time that I remember seeing that.
Yeah, and I think, and was it I forgot which tech company, maybe it was Google that like formed a union for the first time in like 2022 or 2021. I think that was also another sea change moment for me, where it was like, I think people in the tech industry are starting to break out of that bubble. Why exactly, I don't know, but it's certainly a good thing. It's something that I hope keeps happening.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. I think another place that we don't see a ton of representation, I guess you could say, is Asian American guys.
Sure.
Publicly, really out there showing solidarity with Palestine. That is, I'm generalizing because, you go to protests, you see like people, like all types of people out there. And I, like, conceivably, I could be unaware that people are Asian American who are indeed Asian American. Being someone who's mixed, I take that into consideration. But do you think I'm mistaken in saying that Asian American guys have been quieter around this issue?
Well, I can't. I'm like you. I don't want to speak for everyone here,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely something I've noticed. There was an event I was at. I think they like invited me to participate in some kind of teaching or whatever. I remember sitting next to like a Muslim imam, like a community organizer to my left, and I remember him just saying something along the lines of like, "Oh, I've never like sat next to an Asian brother like this before," and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." But yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I can't really speak to everyone's experience here. I would say my personal experience. I'm like my parents were immigrants. They immigrated to the U.S. And then I was born here, and I think my personal experience is that I think there's a sense, especially with immigrants or children of immigrants, that once you get here and you start a life here, you basically achieve that so-called American dream. Like, you're here, you made it, you had kids. Your kids are born here in the U.S., so they have birthright citizenship, and they get a job, and you're good. Like, you don't have to think about politics anymore because you're here in the U.S. and you can just lay low and only try and get a good job, make sure it pays well, and you don't have to think about anything anymore because you're here in the U.S. and you made it. And I think that's the kind of sentiment that I had growing up, and the people around me, who many of whom were also immigrants or children of immigrants, have that same sentiment. And I don't know if it's exclusive to Asian Americans, but and I'm speaking as an Asian American, I think that was the sentiment that I had. But the more I interacted with other people outside of just the Asian American community, or just people like online, or like at a protest or something, you start to realize that as an American, immigrant or not, like there are all these things that you are complicit in, or things that you have to advocate for as an American, because like, again, tying it back to Israel Palestine, which is the topic of the day, like we live in, as you said, like the metropole of the Israeli colonial settler project. And if it weren't for U.S. support, like Israel would just basically cease to exist as it currently does. It's our weapons, it's our tax dollars, it's our unlimited diplomatic support. So, as an American, it actually puts us in this very powerful place where if we can get our government to change its tune on Israel by just collapsing public support for all of its war crimes, we are going to be the difference makers here. Like, I mean, all solidarity to, for example, the countries in Europe that, like the strikes in Italy that have been shutting down docks, that have been
Yep.
sending weapons to Israel, have been amazing to watch and very heartening. But at the same time, like we as Americans, we are in the center of it all. And so immigrant or not, I think it's very important that we recognize that as Americans, there's something we really can do to put a stop to this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious to hear your experiences. I don't know if maybe I'll make it back and forth, but curious to hear your thoughts on how the Asian American experience ties into this. Because I really get a chance to talk about that. Even when I'm doing interviews and stuff, it's pretty rare to have someone even mixed Asian American on the other side.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I mean, I think you're right. I think that like newer to the US people probably are like, damn, I really did that. I had to go through this arduous immigration process. I'm done thinking about like political topics for many lifetimes. But I think but then you also have like very like right-wing forces that came out of like Stop Asian Hate around 2020, where like this moment like that came out of a shooting that happened to like low-income recent immigrant sex workers that was kind of weaponized by the more right-wing forces, more ruling class forces. And so you have organizations that I've talked about before with Dylan Rodriguez, who's at UC Riverside, like the Asian American Foundation, which within 6 months of its founding in 2021 had $1 billion, had raised $1 billion. And one of the board members of the Asian American Foundation was the head of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, which is this very Zionist organization. Last name Greenblatt.
Jonathan Greenblatt.
Thank you. Why was this dude the only white dude on the board at this newly formed Asian American Foundation? And I think it's pretty clear that it was, a counterinsurgency measure for people that might have built more solidarity with people who were out there for Palestine, were out there like against police violence. I think it was a co-optation, unfortunately, of energy that might have been there on like a more radical tip. It's clear that there has been an effort to separate these, people who are facing like some similar sorts of discrimination from like teaming up against white supremacy. And I think it would be great if we all focused a little bit more energy on those white supremacists that are making these efforts to break up what could be more diverse movements.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, it's not something I think about too much, I would say, but you do bring up a good point, because it's like, and I don't want to speak for all Asian Americans here, but I think especially as like someone who goes as like East Asian, like Chinese, Taiwanese, Japanese, Korean, it's like we do have. You're absolutely right that there is Asian hate. Like I've had like random cops tell me, "We'll go back to where you came from," or whatever, or people asking me what country I'm from and stuff like that. But at the same time, like I think we definitely have a level of privilege that a lot of other minorities don't. And again, kind of speaking maybe just for myself here, not for everyone, but we certainly are coded in like the American consciousness as people who are like, they're very educated, they're very nice and polite, they study very hard, and they put their nose down and they grind it. They're not like controversial. And I think there is this kind of privilege that we're afforded in this way. When I go through like a TSA screening or whatever, unlike any other minority I could think of off the top of my head, I don't have to worry about being singled out, in a way that like someone who goes as Muslim or Latino might have struggles going through like TSA at the airport, or just walking down the street, and like when I see a cop car, I don't have the same fears that someone who's Latino or Muslim or Black would. And so, yeah, I think you're absolutely right that like it'd be really nice if this kind of privilege that we have could be used to build even more solidarity, because there is Asian hate, but at the same time, we're also some of us, I'd say, are also in a position of privilege that we can use and leverage. I don't know. It's an interesting conversation. It's not something I'm super well read on, but
totally. Yeah, I think also, yeah, like specifying East Asian is something that I should have done, because I feel like there's, in particular, I've seen firsthand like a lot of people who are like Filipino American, like doing a lot of this work against imperialism and in solidarity with Palestine, and South Asian people, same. I saw on TikTok somebody was making a comparison, saying that Japan was the Israel of Asia, which, as half Japanese person, like I kind of feel that. Like I hear where they're coming from. I mean, Japan was an extremely fascist place for a very long time, and still has a lot of those elements happening in 2025. Again, generalizing, but thank you for humoring me on that conversation. And maybe people will like be in the comments on this and be like, what are you talking about? Like, this is anecdotal, that and this is not actually true. Please let me know if that's the case. But wanted to end, before I keep you too long, with asking what actions you would tell people to do who want to help right now.
Yeah, great. So this is definitely the place where I'm supposed to plug that we set up a fundraiser recently. I think it's tinyurl.com/BE4P, so Berkeley Eeks, the number 4, and then P for Palestine fundraiser. I think that's right. Maybe you can like throw a link in there.
We can link it, in the show notes.
Okay, sweet. Sure. Yeah. So this is pretty cool. One of the organizers I was working with got in touch with someone currently in Deir al-Balah, which is in central Gaza. That's where a lot of the people who are being displaced from Gaza City are currently fleeing. And he set up this mutual aid project, and we've been trying to raise money for them. And it's great because there are a lot of really big mutual aid projects and charities that are getting lots of attention, but this one was kind of more under the radar. So I think it's pretty cool that the UC Berkeley like CS community, or just STEM community, or just people like your community, I guess now, that have heard about the action that we're taking, are able to chip in and like make a really big difference. Because I mean, these are people who are literally starving right now as we're speaking. They don't have water, they don't have shelter, they don't have food, and so the absolute least we can do as people who pay tax dollars to build those bombs is to donate to mutual aid efforts like this, where the money goes directly to people in Gaza. So yeah, we have this fundraiser going, and I think to your point about like censorship and repression, that's absolutely a valid point that you're making. And I think a lot of people who are maybe like they're on like a student visa or something might have a harder time speaking out about the genocide, which I totally understand. Like, for all the speaking out that we're doing now, like there absolutely is repression that's going on. But I think it's nice that there are fundraisers like this where you don't have to put your name on it, and you can just anonymously chip in something and make a difference. So I think that's pretty good. Besides that, I would say the other thing that as part of this hunger strike, we're trying to achieve is beyond those demands, is just to like get people to talk about it, because as mentioned earlier, one of the fronts of the Israeli war, I think it's either like an Israeli journalist or like a general who said this or something, but they were like, oh, we're fighting like a 7-front war, which is like absolutely insane to start with. But they were like, the 8th front is the information war in the US, where we're up against like pro-Palestinian protesters or people who are outspoken about Palestine. And so Israel is absolutely aware that they need to win this information war in the US to continue our support, because without our support, as we mentioned, they would collapse. But like they're losing, and Israel is absolutely losing this information war. And the way that we continue to press on it and make sure that they lose it for good is to just have conversations about it. And like it's a tough conversation to open for sure, but it's a conversation that has to happen. It's urgent, given again, like every day you're 80 more Palestinians, 100 more Palestinians get killed. So yeah, I would, those are probably the two I would point out. Just getting involved, talking about it, supporting Gaza mutual aid, especially in a moment this urgent, because Palestine really can't wait.
Yeah. I also have some friends that organize with Beta Gaza mutual aid as well. So
right.
We'll link to them and the group that you mentioned in the show notes. Thank you so much, Peyrin. And I mean, I hope that you're able to eat soon. Genocide ends.
Thank you. This is super enlightening. I'm gonna go lie down now.
All right.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Night.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the show, and especially thank you to everyone who is contributing over at patreon.com/SadFrancisco. You're making it possible for Sad Francisco to exist. And if you're not already a member, think about joining. Again, it's patreon.com/SadFrancisco.